There were 4 of them in that living room the night I told them I was leaving. My father, my older brother, my aunt, and my cousin, who hadn't spoken to me directly in 6 months, but somehow had plenty to say that night. They sat there like a panel, like I was on trial. And maybe I was. I was 24 years old. I had $2,200 in a savings account that nobody knew about, a job offer in Phoenix that I hadn't told anyone about, and a duffel bag I had quietly packed over the course of 3 weeks. One hoodie at a time so nobody would notice things going missing from my closet. I had been planning this for longer than I want to admit. The thing people don't understand about leaving, the people who ask, why didn't you just talk to them? Why didn't you try to work it out? Is that some of us spend years trying to work it out before we ever get to the leaving part. The leaving isn't the crisis. The leaving is what happens when you finally accept that the crisis was never going to resolve itself. I grew up in Decatur, Illinois. My mother passed away when I was 11, and after that it was just my father, my brother, and me in a house that always felt one paycheck away from something bad. My father worked. He worked hard, I'll give him that, but he also drank on weekends. And when he drank he got mean, not violent mean, more quiet mean. The kind where he'd look at you and say something that would take you years to fully understand was as cruel as it was. My brother was 5 years older than me, and treated me the way boys in that house learned to treat the women in it. Like I was useful when he needed something and invisible when he didn't. By the time I was 15 I was cooking dinner 4 nights a week, not because anyone asked me to formally, but because if I didn't, dinner didn't happen, and if dinner didn't happen, my father would come home at 9 o'clock, and the whole house would feel like a held breath. By 16 I was doing the grocery run on my bike. By 17 I was covering the electric bill twice out of money I'd saved from babysitting the neighbor's kids. Nobody thanked me. It wasn't a transaction in their minds. It was just what I did. It was just what I was for. My aunt, my dad's sister. She lived 20 minutes away, and came around for Sunday dinners and holidays. She was the kind of woman who said things like family fond and blood is blood, while never actually doing anything that cost her personally. My cousin, her son, was 3 years older than me, and had been in and out of work since he graduated high school. She thought he hung the moon. She talked about him the way people talk about someone with enormous potential who just hadn't been discovered yet. I watched him not be discovered for about 7 years. When I got into the university in Champaign on a partial academic scholarship, my father's response was, "How are you going to pay for the rest of it?" Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just the immediate practical problem, stated flatly, like I had announced a complication rather than an achievement. I paid for it the way I paid for everything. I worked. I took out the minimum in loans I had to. I got a second part-time job junior year. I came home summers and fell back into the same patterns. The cooking, the grocery runs, the invisible labor that everyone accepted without comment. My brother had moved out by then, into an apartment across town, but he came back for Sunday dinners, and my father would spend an hour talking to him about his life, his work, his opinions, while I refilled everyone's water glasses and washed the dishes afterward. I graduated in May. I found a job in accounting at a mid-size company in Springfield. I moved back home temporarily, I told myself temporarily, to save money before getting my own place. That was the plan. 6 months, maybe 8. Save enough for first and last month's rent and a real security deposit. That was the plan. 14 months later I was still there. The job offer in Phoenix came through a college friend who had moved there the year before. Her company was expanding. The money was significantly better than what I was making. The cost of living, she assured me, was manageable. I could actually build something. I could actually get ahead. I spent 6 weeks going back and forth over email and phone calls with the hiring manager before I said yes. I didn't tell my family. I started saving differently after that. Aggressively. I opened a second account at a different bank. I contributed to it the way you contribute to something you don't want anyone asking questions about. I stopped going out, which nobody noticed. I started buying less of things, which nobody noticed either. Because the things I bought were household things. And when you stop buying them for a shared household, somebody has to pick up the slack, and that becomes its own kind of pressure. My father noticed the groceries slipping. He mentioned it once, not as a question, just as an observation, the way he made most of his complaints. "We're out of everything," he said, standing in front of an open refrigerator like I had failed a task he'd never assigned me. "I've been busy," I said. He made a sound that meant he didn't find that adequate, and that was the end of the conversation. I want to tell you about the night things actually broke, the specific night, because I need you to understand that it wasn't dramatic, in the way people imagine these things are dramatic. There was no screaming. There were no dishes thrown. It was actually very quiet, which made it worse. My cousin had gotten himself into trouble. Not legal trouble, financial trouble. He'd co-signed something with a friend who had then disappeared, and now there was a debt collection situation, and he needed $3,500 to resolve it, before it affected his credit and, more importantly, before my aunt had to know the full extent of it. He came to my father. My father didn't have $300. My father apparently had decided that I probably did. My father brought it up at dinner, not subtly. He told me what my cousin needed. He told me about the debt situation. He looked at me across the table and said, "You've been saving. You could help him out." Not a question, a statement. I put my fork down. I remember doing that specifically, setting it down carefully, because I needed my hands to not be holding anything. "No," I said. My father's jaw tightened. My cousin looked at the table. My aunt, who had been sitting there the whole time as if this conversation was a natural thing to be having, said, "It's family, sweetheart." And I said, very carefully, "What has this family done for me?" The room went somewhere cold. I could feel it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I've paid the electric bill twice," I said. "I covered groceries for 4 months straight the year I moved back in. I cooked dinner in this house for 9 years. I drove my brother to work every morning for 6 weeks when his car broke down. And he never once said thank you. And nobody in this room said anything about that either. I've been holding this house together since I was 15 years old, and I'm sitting here being asked to drain my savings account for someone who has never once helped me with anything." My aunt opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," I said. She closed it. "I've been offered a job in Phoenix. I leave in 4 weeks. I wasn't going to tell anyone yet, but since we're all here now you know," my father said. "You're not serious." "I am," I said. "I've been serious about it for a long time." My brother had come through the front door maybe 20 minutes before all this, and he was standing in the kitchen doorway now, holding a can of something, watching me like I was a different person than the one he'd always assumed I was. Maybe I was. I'm not sure anymore. That night, after everyone had said what they needed to say. My father saying I was throwing my family away, my aunt saying I had a responsibility, my cousin not saying much of anything, which told me everything about his character. I went to my grandmother's room. I should have mentioned her sooner. She lived with us. Had for 3 years after she could no longer manage her own house. She was the only person in that family I had ever felt truly seen by. She was sharp, my grandmother. She didn't miss much. I sat on the edge of her bed and told her I was going. She already knew. She said she'd known something was coming for a while. She reached under her mattress, which made me want to laugh and cry at the same time, and she pulled out an envelope. Inside was $480, which she had apparently been saving from her Social Security for the better part of a year. She said, "That's for your first month somewhere safe." I cried. That was the only time I cried through all of it. I left 4 weeks later on a Tuesday morning. I had a 12-hour drive ahead of me. I had my car loaded with everything that mattered. I had the $2,200. I had my grandmother's $480. I had the offer letter, and I had the very particular feeling of someone who has made a decision so long in the making that the actual execution of it feels less like an event and more like the final page of a very long chapter. I did not say goodbye to my father. I said goodbye to my grandmother. I told her I would call her every Sunday. I kept that promise for 4 years, until she passed. I did not tell my brother I was leaving. He found out from my father apparently, and he sent me a text that said, "Really?" And I did not respond. Phoenix was hard, at first. The way any new beginning is hard when you're doing it entirely alone. The job was good. My friend helped me find an apartment in Tempe, a 1-bedroom that was small, but mine. I bought a coffee maker and a second-hand couch, and a plant from the farmer's market, and I put them all in this small apartment, and I stood in the middle of it on a Saturday morning, and felt something I can only describe as a very quiet kind of joy. The first time my father called was 7 weeks after I left. I let it go to voicemail. He said I needed to call him back. He didn't say he missed me. He didn't say he was sorry. He said he needed to talk to me, in the tone of someone who believes the conversation will go the way they've decided it will go. I didn't call back. My aunt called twice. My cousin texted once, asking if I knew any people hiring in the Phoenix area, because he was thinking about relocating. I did not respond to that one. My brother called a few months later. That one I almost answered. I had a complicated relationship with my brother that I don't think was ever entirely his fault. He'd learned what he'd learned from the people who raised him, and I understood that. But understanding why someone is the way they are doesn't mean you have the energy to be the one who helps them become different. I let it go to voicemail. He said he hoped I was okay. That was the most human he'd ever sounded to me, and it made me feel sad in a way that was entirely separate from anger. I blocked the numbers after that, not out of anger, out of self-preservation. I had started therapy 6 months after moving, and my therapist had a way of asking questions that helped me understand that I had been operating in a state of low-grade emergency for most of my life. The hypervigilance of someone who had never been allowed to just exist, without also performing a function. I was learning how to exist. I needed quiet to do it. 4 years passed, then 5, then 7. I got promoted. I moved into a better apartment, 2 bedrooms, which felt decadent and unnecessary, and which I loved completely. I made friends. Real ones. The kind you make when you finally have the bandwidth to actually be present with people, rather than just managing their needs. I started running. I took a pottery class and was genuinely terrible at it, and found the experience of being genuinely terrible at something enjoyable for the first time in my life, because it meant I was doing it for no reason except that I wanted to. I started dating someone in my 5th year. His name was, I'll keep that private. I'm not ready to give that part of this story to the internet. But it was serious for a while, in the way that first real adult relationships are serious. We were together for 2 years. We ended it gently, and I was okay, which told me I was more okay than I had been. I do not want to make this sound like I was entirely healed. You don't fully heal from growing up the way I grew up. What you do, if you're lucky and if you work at it, is learn to put it somewhere that doesn't take up the whole room. I still sometimes reach for the phone to call my grandmother on Sundays before I remember. That part doesn't get better. Some losses just stay. I had not spoken to my father in 8 years and 11 months when my phone started ringing. It was a Saturday in November. I had just gotten back from a run. I was in my kitchen making coffee and my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring. 20 minutes later, same number. I silenced it. An hour after that, a different number. Then a third. I didn't think much of it that afternoon. I figured it was spam, or someone had gotten my number wrong, or any of the 100 mundane explanations that usually account for things like that. That evening I sat down with a glass of wine and looked at my phone properly for the first time, and I had 43 missed calls and messages across 4 different numbers in the space of 6 hours. I want you to understand what that feels like, to sit with your phone in your hand and realize that 43 separate attempts to reach you happened while you were going about your Saturday. It doesn't feel like a lot of love rushing towards you. It feels like a wall coming at you, and your entire nervous system has to decide in about 4 seconds how to respond. I did not call anyone back that night. Instead, I called my friend, the one who had first told me about the Phoenix job, the one who had been there for almost all of this, and I read her the voicemail transcripts one by one. My phone had auto-transcribed them, imperfectly, but enough. My brother had called 6 times. He said he needed to talk to me. He said something had happened with my father. He said it was important. He said, in the 6th message, that he was sorry. He was genuinely sorry, and that he wished things had been different. My aunt had called 4 times. She was not sorry in her messages. She was urgent. She wanted to know where I was, whether I was coming, what my plan was. She kept saying family comes together and this is not the time. My cousin had called once, a message so brief and so clearly uncomfortable that I almost felt something for him. Just, hey, it's me. Call someone. My father had called 9 times. He did not leave a single voicemail. The remaining calls were from a number that turned out to be a neighbor of my father's, a woman I vaguely remembered from childhood, who left a calm and kind message, explaining that my father was in the hospital. He'd had a cardiac event. That was the phrase she used, 2 days earlier, and had been asking for me. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be honest with you about what I felt, because I think there's a version of this story where the narrator says she felt nothing, or she felt only vindicated. And I don't think either of those things would be true for me. What I felt was complicated in the specific way that only family can make you feel complicated. I felt grief for something that had never been what it should have been. I felt fear for a person I had loved before I knew I was also allowed to be angry at him. I felt tired in a way that was old and familiar. The particular exhaustion of being needed by people who had never asked how you were doing. And underneath all of it, very quietly, I felt something that took me a few days to name. I felt like I had been right to leave. Not in a triumphant way, just in the way that you feel right about a decision, when you see evidence that the dynamics you left behind have continued on perfectly well without you. That the people who told you the family needed you simply needed you the way a system needs a part, not the way a person needs another person. My brother's voicemails, the word sorry in them, real and uncomfortable. That was the thing I kept coming back to. I called him back 3 days later. It was a Wednesday evening. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage at work because I needed the contained space of it. I called my brother, who I had not spoken to in almost 9 years, and he answered on the second ring. He sounded older. Of course he did. We both were. He said, I didn't know if you'd call. I said, I almost didn't. We were quiet for a moment. He told me about my father. The cardiac event had been serious, but not as bad as it could have been. He was recovering. He was home now, with some modifications to his diet, and a prescription regimen, and the kind of instructions people are given, and don't always follow. He was asking for me. He had, apparently, been asking for me since the hospital. I said, he never left a voicemail. My brother said, yeah, he doesn't know how. That landed somewhere strange in my chest. My brother said he wasn't calling to guilt me. He said he understood if I didn't want to come, or didn't want to engage, or needed more time. He said he had been thinking, these past few years, about a lot of things. He said our childhood wasn't what it should have been, And he said it plainly, without hedging or minimizing, and I realized that was probably one of the hardest things he'd ever said out loud. I did not go to Decatur. I want to be clear about that, because I think some part of people want this kind of story to end, with the drive back home, and the reconciliation scene, and the hands held in the hospital. And I understand why. It's a satisfying ending, but it wouldn't have been an honest one. What I did was write my father a letter, an actual letter, handwritten, 2 pages. I told him I had heard he was not well and that I was glad he was recovering. I told him I hoped he was taking care of himself. I told him, in one careful paragraph, that I had not disappeared because I stopped caring about him, but because I had needed to stop disappearing inside the life he had let me build for everyone else. I did not say I forgave him. I'm not there yet, and I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not for the sake of a tidy conclusion. I did say that I was open, slowly, cautiously, to seeing what, if anything, a relationship could look like now, on terms that were different from the ones I grew up under. I left my email address. Not my phone number, my email. He has not written back. It's been 6 weeks. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. My brother and I have spoken 3 more times since that Wednesday in the parking garage. It is careful, and a little awkward, and sometimes feels like we are 2 people learning a language we both grew up around but were never quite taught. I don't know what it will become. I'm trying not to decide in advance. My aunt has not contacted me again after I did not respond to her calls. I consider that a kind of gift. My cousin's number, I still don't have. I am 33 years old. I have a job I am genuinely good at, and a life I built from the inside out. I have friends who would drive through the night for me, and I would do the same for them. I have a therapist I have been seeing for 7 years who has helped me understand that the version of myself I was at 24, the one who couldn't quite believe she was allowed to want things for herself, was not a personal failing. She was the logical product of the specific environment she grew up in, and she found her out. That matters. I'm not telling you this story because I think I did everything perfectly. I didn't. I handled things imperfectly and messily and sometimes without grace, the way real people do. I'm telling you this story because I spent a long time believing that the word family was a ceiling, that it described the outer boundary of my obligations, and also, somehow, the outer boundary of what I deserved. It isn't. It doesn't. The people who love you correctly will not require you to disappear into their needs. The people who love you correctly make room, and if there is no room, if you have spent years folding yourself smaller and smaller, trying to fit a shape that was never actually made for you. Leaving is not abandonment. It is not ingratitude. It is not selfishness, no matter how many times you are told it is. It is something else entirely, something that starts with you, and belongs to you, and that nobody gets to name but you. I drove out of Decatur on a Tuesday morning 9 years ago, and I have never once wished I had waited longer to go. I only wish I had left sooner.